I put my wife through medical school while I worked 2 jobs. The day she became a doctor, she said, "TM too successful to be with someone like you." The next morning, she learned what happens when you burn bridges. 7 years. That's how long I dedicated my life to building a future for us. 7 years of double shifts, aching muscles, and barely enough sleep to function. 7 years of believing that love, commitment, and sacrifice would be enough to carry us through. I was never a man of grand ambitions. I didn't dream of wealth, luxury, or status. My happiness was simple. I wanted a stable life, a happy home, and a wife who felt safe and fulfilled. And Vanessa? She had dreams bigger than both of us combined. From the moment we met, she spoke of becoming a doctor with a fire in her eyes that couldn't be extinguished. "I want to help people," she would say, "to save lives, to make a difference." I admired her for it. How could I not? Her ambition was magnetic, her determination unwavering. I knew from the start that supporting her meant making sacrifices, and I was willing to do whatever it took to see her succeed. While she spent her days attending lectures and nights buried in textbooks, I worked first as a warehouse worker, stacking crates until my arms burned, then as a night shift security guard, watching over silent buildings while exhaustion clawed at me. I lived in a cycle of labor and fatigue, barely scraping by, but I never once resented it. We lived in a tiny cramped apartment where the walls were so thin we could hear our neighbors arguing late into the night. The paint was peeling, the plumbing barely worked, and the single window in the kitchen overlooked a back alley filled with garbage bins. It wasn't much, but it was home. I didn't need luxury. I didn't need comfort. I just needed her. I still remember the night she'd look up from her medical books. Her eyes filled with guilt as she saw me dragging myself through the door, too tired to even take off my shoes. "You should rest more," she would say softly, reaching for my hand. And I would always smile, brushing her hair back gently. "I'll rest when you're a doctor." That was the promise. She had big dreams, and I made them mine. The warnings I ignored. My best friend, Daniel, never stopped warning me. He was the only one who dared to say what no one else would. "Not every woman remembers who stood by them during the struggle," he told me over coffee one morning before my shift. "People change when they get what they want. Just be careful." I laughed. "You don't know her like I do. She's not like that." "She loves me." Daniel sighed, stirring his coffee. "I hope you're right, man. Just don't be blind." I dismissed his words. I refused to believe that the woman I loved, the woman who had cried in my arms when she failed an exam, the woman who kissed me every morning before I left for work, the woman who promised we were building a future together could ever betray me. She wasn't like that. She wasn't. The price of love. Every penny I made went toward supporting us. Her tuition, her textbooks, her endless medical supplies, I covered it all. Some months after paying for her school fees, we barely had enough to eat. I remember standing in the grocery store, calculating every single item in my cart, making sure we didn't go over budget. I stopped buying new clothes for myself. My shoes wore out, but I kept wearing them. My shirts faded, but I didn't care. Every extra dollar went to her education, and I never once complained because I believed in her, because I believed in us. She always told me, "Once I become a doctor, everything will change. We'll have a better life," and I believed her. I held on to that belief every time exhaustion made my vision blur. I clung to it every time I had to skip meals so she could eat. I reminded myself of it whenever I saw her sleeping peacefully while I dragged myself out of bed to start another shift. Love was supposed to be enough, wasn't it? The first cracks. In the final year of her medical school, I started noticing small changes. She became distant. Conversations that used to be filled with warmth became short and dismissive. She stopped asking how my day was. She stopped waiting up for me at night. She started spending more time at school, staying late for study sessions. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then the excuses started piling up. I'd ask, "Want to grab dinner together?" She'd reply, "I'm too busy. I'd suggest a weekend together." She'd sigh, "I have too much studying to do." It was subtle at first, like a slow unraveling of something I couldn't quite grasp, but I ignored it. I told myself she was just stressed, that medical school was overwhelming. She'd always come back to me. She had to, right? The unspoken truth. The final straw came when she stopped saying "I love you." At first, I thought it was a mistake, something she didn't realize she was doing. But night after night, I noticed the absence of those 3 words. I started testing it. When I left for work, I'd kiss her on the forehead and whisper, "I love you." She'd only nod. When I brought home her favorite meal, hoping to surprise her, I said, "I love you." She only smiled without saying it back. I told myself it didn't mean anything. I told myself that stress could make people forget the small things. But deep down, something felt wrong, and I refused to acknowledge it, because if I admitted it, then I would have to face the truth. That maybe, just maybe, Daniel had been right all along, the man who gave everything. For 7 years, I gave her everything. My time, my energy, my money, my love. I built her future with my own hands, believing that in the end, it would be worth it. Because I loved her. Because I thought she loved me too. But love is only real when it's reciprocated. And soon, I would learn that some people only stay until they get what they want, until they don't need you anymore. And that realization? It would change everything. 2 months before Vanessa's graduation, something happened that I never saw coming. It started with a simple phone call, one that I almost ignored. I had just finished my warehouse shift, body aching from lifting crates all night. My phone vibrated in my pocket as I stepped into the crisp morning air. I glanced at the unknown number and debated whether I had the energy to answer. Something told me to pick up. Hello? My voice was hoarse from exhaustion. Is this Mr. Carter? The voice on the other end was smooth, professional. I frowned. Nobody called me Mr. Carter. Yes. Who's this? My name is James Holloway. I'm calling on behalf of Margaret Carter's estate. I nearly dropped the phone. Auntie Margaret, my father's older sister, the wealthy, eccentric woman who had been somewhat of a mystery to me my whole life. She had no husband, no children, and for reasons I never quite understood, she distanced herself from most of the family. I hadn't spoken to her in years. She passed away last week, the man continued. I blinked. Oh, I didn't know. I'm sorry. She left something for you, he said. Can you come to my office today? I didn't know what to think. Why would she leave me anything? She had never shown much interest in my life. The last time I saw her, I was still a teenager. But I went. A life-changing moment. James Holloway's office was located in a towering building that smelled of polished wood and old money. I sat across from him, heart pounding, as he slid a thick envelope across the desk. This is your inheritance. I hesitated before opening it. My hands trembled as I pulled out the documents inside. The first thing I saw was a number so large I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. $10 million. I stared at it, my mind refusing to process what I was looking at. There must be a mistake, I said slowly. This can't be mine. James adjusted his glasses. Margaret Carter had no immediate family left, and she specifically named you in her will. She wanted you to have this. I sat there, stunned. $10 million. I had spent years scraping by, working myself to the bone, sacrificing everything for a better future. And now, just like that, I was a millionaire. I should have been ecstatic. I should have been jumping for joy. But instead, I felt uneasy, because the first thought that crossed my mind wasn't about myself. It was about Vanessa, keeping it a secret. I walked out of that office a different man. The weight of my struggles had been lifted in an instant, yet I felt more burdened than ever. I couldn't tell Vanessa. Not yet. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I wanted to see something first. For 7 years, I had given everything to her, never once asking for anything in return. But I had been noticing the changes in her. The way she spoke to me. The way she looked at me. The way she avoided saying, I love you. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. But now, with $10 million in my name, I had the chance to find out who she really was. Would she love me the same if she thought I was still just a warehouse worker? Or was her love conditional, tied to my sacrifices, tied to what I could give her? I decided to wait, to watch, to see if Vanessa still saw me as the man who had stood by her for 7 years, or if I had just been a stepping stone, a grand gesture. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I wanted to do something big for her. I had spent years dreaming of the day I could finally take some of the weight off her shoulders, and now I had the means to do so. I wanted to reward her for all the hard work she had put into medical school. So I did something bold. I bought a hospital. Not just any hospital, a private facility with top-of-the-line equipment, modern infrastructure, and a reputation for excellence. A place where she could thrive, where she could finally step into the life she had always wanted. And I put it in her name. It was the ultimate gift, a testament to my faith in her, my belief that we were a team, that everything we had gone through together had led to this moment. I pictured the look on her face when I told her. The joy, the gratitude. I imagined her throwing her arms around me, telling me how much she loved me, how much this meant to her. I imagined the future we would build together. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Hope. The perfect surprise. I made all the arrangements. I signed the paperwork. I poured millions into ensuring that the hospital was fully equipped and staffed. Everything was set. All I had to do was tell her. I decided to do it on her graduation night. It was perfect. The culmination of all her hard work, the moment she had been working toward for years. She would step into her future, and I would show her just how much I believed in her. I couldn't wait to see the joy in her eyes. I couldn't wait to hear her say, "You're amazing. I love you so much." I couldn't wait for us to step into the next chapter of our lives. Little did I know, the only thing waiting for me that night was heartbreak. Graduation day. The day I had been waiting for. The day Vanessa had been working toward for years. I stood in the crowd watching as she crossed the stage wearing her white coat, her head held high, the degree she had sacrificed so much for now officially in her hands. I clapped the loudest, my chest swelling with pride. She did it. We did it. Through all the struggles, the late nights, the financial stress, we had made it. I saw her scanning the audience, and for a brief second, our eyes met. She smiled, but something about it felt different. Not warm, not filled with the love I once knew. I shook off the thought. Tonight would be special. Tonight, I would reveal everything. The hospital, the inheritance, the future I had secured for us. Tonight, we would celebrate our victory. A night of celebration, or so I thought. I spared no expense for dinner. I made reservations at one of the most upscale restaurants in the city. Candlelight, expensive wine, the kind of place we had never been able to afford before. She looked stunning. Her hair perfectly styled, wearing a dress that I had never seen before. It was elegant, expensive looking, nothing like the clothes she used to wear when we were barely scraping by. Something felt off, but I pushed it aside. She deserved this. We sat across from each other, the soft of classical music playing in the background. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm so proud of you," I said. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I took a deep breath, preparing to tell her about the hospital, about the inheritance, about everything. But before I could say a word, she put down her wine glass, folded her hands in front of her, and said something that made my entire world collapse. "I can't be with someone like you anymore." I blinked. My brain refused to process what I had just heard. "What?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She sighed as if she had been carrying a burden for far too long. "I've worked too hard to be stuck in this kind of life. I need someone who matches my status, someone who fits where I'm going." I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. I searched her face, waiting for a sign that this was some kind of twisted joke, but there was no laughter, no hesitation, just cold indifference. I swallowed hard. "Vanessa, are you serious?" She nodded. Serious. Unapologetic. Final. The knife in my back. I felt numb. I thought about the 7 years of sacrifice, the nights I went hungry so she could eat, the times I worked myself to exhaustion while she focused on her studies, the countless moments I told myself it was worth it, and now, here she was, throwing it all away as if none of it mattered. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to control the storm inside me. "You don't mean that," I said, my voice strained. "We've been through too much together for you to just walk away." Her expression didn't change. "I appreciate everything you've done for me, but I need more. More than the man who gave up everything for her. More than the love that had carried her through medical school." I let out a bitter laugh. "So, what am I to you? A stepping stone? A placeholder until you reached where you wanted to be?" She didn't answer, and her silence said everything. A goodbye without words. I looked down at the small velvet box in my pocket, the engagement ring. I had planned to propose tonight to tell her that I had bought a hospital in her name, that we had a future waiting for us, one that I had worked tirelessly to build. I had dreamed of this night being the start of our new chapter. Instead, it was the end of everything. I exhaled sharply, my heart pounding in my chest. I could have fought for her. I could have begged, could have demanded an explanation. But what was there to fight for? She had already made her decision, and I refused to beg for someone who had so easily discarded me. Without another word, I pushed back my chair, stood up, and walked away. Not a single word of anger. Not a single plea for her to stay because I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. I didn't look back. I didn't need to because I had already seen enough. And that night, as I walked away from the woman I had sacrificed everything for, I realized that love had never been enough for her and she was never enough for me. That night, I sat alone in our tiny apartment, staring at the walls that had once felt like home. The silence was unbearable. I kept expecting the front door to open, for her to walk in and tell me it had all been a mistake, that she had spoken out of stress, that she didn't mean a word of what she had said, but the door never opened, and the only mistake that had been made was mine. I had given her my entire world, only to be discarded the moment she no longer needed me. I had spent years believing in us, only to find out that she had never truly believed in me. I clenched my fists. The rage I had suppressed at the restaurant began to build, but it wasn't just anger at her. It was anger at myself for ignoring the signs, for refusing to listen to Daniel's warnings, for thinking that love and sacrifice would be enough for someone like her. I wanted to hate her, but all I felt was emptiness. The message that ended it all. The next morning, my phone buzzed. For a brief second, hope flickered inside me. Maybe she had come to her senses. Maybe she regretted what she had done. But when I opened the message, any trace of hope died instantly. "Vanessa, I'll be coming for my things later. Let's be adults about this. Let's be adults. As if she hadn't just shattered my world in the coldest way possible. As if she hadn't turned her back on me after everything I had done for her. As if I was just some minor inconvenience to be handled. I stared at the message for a long time, my grip on the phone tightening. Then, without replying, I deleted it. She wanted to move on? Fine. Let her. But she would soon realize that the bridge she burned was the only one leading to the future she wanted. The call that changed everything. I sat in the dark for hours, my mind running through every sacrifice I had made. The years of struggle, the missed meals, the double shifts, the times I had pushed my own dreams aside just to make sure she had everything she needed, and she had thrown it all away like it meant nothing. But the thing about sacrifice is that it changes you. It had turned me into a man willing to endure anything for love, but now, it had turned me into a man who was done being used. I picked up my phone. There was one more thing Vanessa didn't know. One last thing that would make her realize the true cost of betraying me. I scrolled through my contacts and dialed the number of my lawyer. The hospital I had bought in her name? I was making sure it stayed under mine. The reality of her choices. I didn't reply to Vanessa's texts. I didn't need to. Instead, I focused on what came next. I had inherited $10 million, but more importantly, I had inherited something far greater: freedom. No more sleepless nights working 2 jobs. No more sacrificing my dreams for someone who never valued me. No more living for someone else. I spent the next few days rewriting my future. I finalized the paperwork to ensure the hospital remained under my name. I met with a team of experts to begin building the medical empire Vanessa thought she was entitled to. And I waited. Waited for the moment when reality would hit her. The beginning of karma. It didn't take long. The news about my hospital acquisition spread quickly. Doctors, specialists, and healthcare professionals began lining up for positions. Meanwhile, Vanessa was about to learn a harsh lesson. She had spent years believing she was destined for something greater. But what she didn't realize was that the world didn't work the way she imagined. Prestigious hospitals weren't lining up to hire her just because she had a degree. Her dream job wasn't waiting for her on a silver platter. And for the first time, she was about to experience what struggle really felt like. The bridge she burned. The day Vanessa came to pick up her things, I wasn't home. I didn't want to see her. I didn't want to hear her voice, to watch her pack up the last remnants of the life we had built together. So I made sure I was gone. When I returned, the apartment felt hollow. I should have felt pain. I should have felt loss, but all I felt was relief because I knew what she didn't. I knew that in just a matter of weeks, she would regret everything. And when she finally realized that the grass wasn't greener on the other side, she would look back at the bridge she burned, only to find that it was already in ashes. Vanessa always thought she was destined for greatness. She believed that once she had her degree, the world would open its arms to her, that success would come effortlessly, that she would walk into a prestigious hospital and be handed everything she had ever dreamed of. But reality doesn't work like that. She had burned the one bridge that could have led her to the future she wanted. And now, she was about to fall. A harsh awakening. 2 weeks had passed since Vanessa walked away from me. Since she packed up her things and moved into whatever life she thought was waiting for her. I didn't bother checking up on her. She made her choice, but life has a way of teaching people the lessons they refuse to learn. Vanessa's dream had always been to work in a top-tier hospital, to be surrounded by the best doctors, to live a life of prestige and admiration. She had assumed that the moment she graduated, hospitals would compete to hire her. She was wrong. I heard it through mutual friends first, rumors, whispers. Vanessa was struggling. She had sent applications everywhere, expecting immediate callbacks, interviews, offers. Instead, she received rejection after rejection. Hospitals weren't desperate for fresh graduates with no connections. Her degree alone wasn't enough, and the reality that she had never prepared for failure was beginning to sink in. Meanwhile, I thrived. While Vanessa was facing closed doors, I was building an empire. The hospital I had purchased, the one I had originally planned to give to her, was growing faster than I had expected. Doctors and specialists were eager to join my team. Investors were showing interest. The media had started covering the story of the mysterious young entrepreneur who had acquired a major medical facility. And Vanessa? She was still unemployed. The moment she realized the truth, it happened when her best friend, Claire, unknowingly sealed Vanessa's fate. One evening, as Vanessa sat scrolling through job postings, her phone lit up with a message from Claire. Claire, hey, have you seen this? There's a new hospital in town, and they're offering top salaries. You should apply. Attached to the message was a job listing. Vanessa clicked on the link, skimming through the details. High pay, excellent benefits. A chance to work at a rapidly growing, privately owned medical facility. Her heart leaped. This was exactly the opportunity she needed. But then, her eyes landed on the hospital's name. and her breath caught in her throat. It was my hospital. The one she had thrown away. The realization must have hit her like a train. The hospital she had believed was beneath her, the hospital she had never even considered working at, was now one of the most coveted places to work, and I was the one who owned it. Denial and desperation. At first, she scoffed. She told herself, I don't need this. I can do better. But the days stretched into weeks, and the job offers never came. Her savings started to dwindle. The reality of rent, bills, and student loans was starting to crush her. For the first time in her life, she was experiencing what I had endured for 7 years. The desperation she once looked down on. The struggle she had believed she was too good for. And suddenly, the hospital she had laughed at didn't seem so small anymore. The decision she never thought she'd make. Vanessa sat in her tiny apartment, an apartment far less comfortable than the one we had shared, and stared at the job application. Her pride screamed at her to close the tab, to not give me the satisfaction, to find another way. But reality didn't care about pride. And so, with shaking hands, she filled out the application. She submitted it and she waited, not realizing that the man she had betrayed was the very person who would decide her fate. 2 weeks after Vanessa's world began to crumble, I sat in my office reviewing job applications for the hospital. My hospital, the one I had originally intended for her. I had spent the last few weeks building something great, surrounding myself with people who saw my worth, not just because of my success, but because of my work ethic, my resilience, my vision. The hospital was growing faster than I expected, attracting some of the best medical professionals in the industry. I was no longer the man struggling to survive. I was the man creating opportunities for others. And then, as I sifted through the applications on my desk, my eyes landed on a name that made my breath catch, Vanessa Carter. I let out a slow, humorless laugh. Of course, she had nowhere else to go. Her arrogance had burned every bridge, and now she was standing at my doorstep, knocking, hoping I would let her in. I leaned back in my chair, staring at her neatly typed resume. The same hands that had once held mine now writing a desperate plea for employment. Oh, how the tables had turned. The interview she never expected. I didn't reject her application immediately. No, that would have been too easy. Instead, I invited her in for an interview. Not because I intended to give her the job, but because I wanted to see the look on her face when she realized just who she was begging for a second chance. The day of the interview arrived. I sat behind my desk, the large window behind me overlooking the city skyline. The room was sleek, modern, nothing like the life Vanessa had known me to have. I heard a soft knock on the door. Come in. The door opened, and there she stood. Vanessa. She looked different. The confidence she once carried so effortlessly was shaken. The arrogance in her eyes was replaced with uncertainty. She had always been beautiful, but now she looked small. Like a woman who had realized too late that she had made the worst mistake of her life. Her eyes met mine, and in that single second, I saw it. The shock, the horror, the realization. She had no idea who owned this hospital until now. Face to face with karma, she froze. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I smiled, leaning forward, resting my elbows on the desk. Welcome, Vanessa. I saw the way she swallowed, the way her hands clenched slightly at her sides. What are you doing here? She stammered. I tilted my head. Oh, didn't you hear? I let the silence stretch, enjoying the way her face paled as I leaned back. I own this hospital. Her breath hitched. I could almost hear the thoughts racing through her head. The realization that she had left the one man who had been willing to sacrifice everything for her. The realization that the underachiever she had discarded had built something greater than she could have ever imagined. She had thrown me away. And now, she was sitting in my office, needing my help. It was poetic. It was justice, desperation, and regret. I didn't know, she whispered. Of course you didn't, I said smoothly, watching her squirm. You were too busy looking down on me to see what I was building. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, Vanessa had nothing to say. I let the silence stretch between us before I spoke again, my voice calm, controlled. You applied for a job here? She nodded slowly. I really need this job, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Oh, how quickly things change. I studied her, letting the moment sink in. The woman who once told me I wasn't good enough for her was now sitting in front of me, waiting for my decision. I should have felt bad for her. I should have pitied her, but I didn't, because I remembered the way she had looked at me the night she left. I remembered the disgust in her voice when she said she needed someone who matched her status. And now? Now, she was the one beneath me, the decision that changed everything. I let out a slow sigh, pretending to consider. I could see the hope flickering in her eyes, the desperation she was trying to hide. I tapped a finger against my desk before finally speaking. You're not qualified for what we're offering. She flinched. I can learn, she said quickly. I'm willing to do anything. I raised an eyebrow. Anything? Funny. 7 years of sacrifice of giving her everything, and she hadn't been willing to fight for me. Now, she was willing to fight for a job. I leaned forward, my voice calm, unwavering. I'll think about it. She let out a breath, nodding. Thank you, she whispered, but we both knew my answer was already decided. Because Vanessa wasn't just asking for a job, she was asking for a second chance, and I had no intention of giving it to her. Vanessa walked out of my office that day with a polite thank you, but I could see it in her eyes, desperation. She had expected to waltz into my hospital, charm her way into a high-paying position, and walk out with her dignity intact. She had no idea that I'd been waiting for this moment, that I had been waiting for the day she would realize that she had thrown away the one person who would have given her everything. And now, she was powerless. A fall from grace. I didn't call her back. I didn't offer her the job. I didn't even acknowledge her existence. And that silence? It was destroying her. Word traveled fast. Doctors she once admired were now working under me. The hospital she once turned her nose up at was now one of the most sought-after medical centers in the city. And Vanessa? She had nowhere to go. I heard through the grapevine that she had been applying everywhere. Big hospitals, private clinics, even understaffed rural facilities. Nobody was hiring her. She had assumed that her degree alone would open doors, that her name on an application would be enough. But reality was cruel. Nobody cared about her struggles, her sacrifices, or her arrogance. She was just another unemployed graduate. And for the first time, she was the one struggling. The friend who told me everything. One afternoon, as I was going over some financial reports, my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. I hadn't spoken to him in a while. He had been traveling, busy with his own life. But when he saw how well I was doing, he couldn't resist catching up. Man, he chuckled. I heard something today, and I had to call you. I smirked. Let me guess. Vanessa? He laughed. You already know. Tell me anyway. Daniel lived for moments like this. He had warned me for years about Vanessa, had always been skeptical of her sudden ambition and the way she carried herself like she was too good for a simple life. She's miserable, he said. Her old friends are dropping her. She's been rejected from every hospital in the city. And get this, I leaned back in my chair, waiting. She's been bad-mouthing you behind your back. I wasn't surprised. Apparently, Daniel continued, she's telling people that you're holding a grudge, that you're being petty by not hiring her. I almost laughed out loud. She really thinks that? I asked, shaking my head. Oh, man, Daniel said, still chuckling. She's panicking. She thought she could just waltz in and take what she wanted. She thought you'd still be the same guy willing to do anything for her, but I wasn't that guy anymore. That version of me had died the night she said, I need someone who matches my status. Now, she was the one begging for a second chance. The desperate plea. It wasn't long before Vanessa came back. One evening, just as I was leaving the hospital, I saw her standing outside near the entrance. She looked different. The confident, self-assured woman I had once loved was gone. In her place was someone who looked lost, fragile, uncertain. She stepped forward as I approached, her eyes searching mine. I said nothing. Just waited. She swallowed. Her voice quieter than I had ever heard it. I just wanted to talk. I raised an eyebrow. About what? She hesitated, then let out a shaky breath. About us. There it was. The thing I had been expecting. The moment where she finally realized the truth. There is no us, Vanessa, I said simply. She flinched. Her eyes darted around, as if trying to find the right words, the right excuse to justify what she had done. I made a mistake, she admitted. I said nothing. She took another step forward, her voice softer, almost pleading. I shouldn't have left you, she said. I was wrong. I watched her. Expression unreadable. She thought this was enough. She thought a simple admission of regret would be enough to erase 7 years of sacrifice. She thought she could just come back and I would take her in with open arms, but I wasn't that man anymore. I was the man who had built something out of nothing and I had built it without her. The coldest truth. I let her words hang in the air before finally responding. You're right, I said. Her face lit up with hope. But some mistakes, I continued, can't be undone. The hope shattered in an instant. Her lips trembled. I still love you. I almost laughed at that. You love me? I echoed, tilting my head. Or do you love the fact that I'm successful now? She flinched again, like my words had physically hit her. Her hands clenched into fists. I could see the anger rising in her now. She wasn't used to this, to being powerless, to being the one who had to beg. She thought I was still the same fool who would do anything for her, but I wasn't. I wish you the best, Vanessa, I said finally, but we're done. And with that, I walked past her, leaving her standing there in the same silence she once left me in. Vanessa left my office in humiliation that day, but I knew this wasn't over for her. She had lost everything she once had. Her pride, her security, her sense of control, and worst of all, she had to watch me succeed without her. The friends who turned their backs. Vanessa had always surrounded herself with people who admired her. Friends who had once celebrated her decision to leave me, who had told her she was making the right choice by seeking a partner who matched her ambition. But success is a fragile thing, especially when it's built on nothing but ego. And when Vanessa's reality crumbled, so did her circle. The moment she lost her ability to impress, her so-called friends vanished. I heard from mutual acquaintances that she had tried to reach out to them, but their responses were cold, dismissive. Some ignored her completely. Some politely declined her invitations. One even told her outright, "I thought you had your life figured out." Guess not. That must have stung because Vanessa had built her entire identity around being the woman who had it all. And now she had nothing, drowning in reality without a job, without a strong network, without someone to hold her up. Vanessa had to face something she had never experienced before. Real struggle. For years, she had watched me fight to make ends meet. She had watched me sacrifice, exhaust myself, break my back just to keep a roof over our heads. And now, she was the one struggling. Rent, bills, student loan payments, they all came crashing down on her at once. And unlike me, she wasn't built for it. She had no backup plan, no safety net, no one left to call. The rise of my success. Meanwhile, my life had never been better. The hospital was thriving. The media was covering my story, painting me as the self-made entrepreneur who had built something remarkable. Investors wanted to work with me. More opportunities were coming in than I could even handle. And the best part? I had real friends who stood by me. Daniel, the only person who had ever seen the truth about Vanessa, laughed when I told him how desperate she had looked when she applied for the job. "She thought she could just crawl back into your life?" He chuckled. "Man, karma really worked fast on this one." I smirked. Faster than even I expected. I wasn't celebrating her downfall. I was celebrating my survival. For the first time, I was free. Free from struggle. Free from manipulation. Free from the lie I had spent years believing. The day she finally broke. It wasn't long before Vanessa showed up again, not at my office, not outside my hospital, but at my home. I opened the door one evening to find her standing there, looking like a shadow of the woman I had once known. Her hair was unkempt. Her makeup was minimal. Her clothes weren't the designer dresses she used to flaunt, just simple, plain fabric that screamed of a woman who had been humbled. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. She looked up at me, her eyes shiny with unshed tears. "Can we talk?" I could have slammed the door in her face. I could have laughed. I could have said, "Talk about what? How you left me. How you thought you were too good for me. How you realized too late that I was the best thing that ever happened to you." But I didn't because I had already won and she knew it. I exhaled sharply. "Say what you need to say." She hesitated. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I regret everything." I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no sadness. Just nothing. I waited, letting her speak. "I was wrong," she continued, her hands trembling. "I didn't see how much you loved me. I didn't realize what I had." I stayed silent. She swallowed, looking at the ground. "I thought I wanted more, but the truth is, I already had everything. I just didn't see it. Too little, too late." She finally lifted her head, eyes pleading. "I still love you." I almost laughed. Love? She had loved the idea of status. She had loved the idea of power. She had never really loved me. I tilted my head. "You love me?" She nodded quickly. "Yes." I let the words hang in the air for a moment before I finally responded. "No, Vanessa." Her breath caught. I stepped forward slightly, looking her dead in the eye. "You don't love me. You love what I've become." Tears slipped down her face. I had waited for this moment. Waited for her to feel what I had felt the night she walked away from me. And now that it was here, it meant nothing. I exhaled slowly, then spoke the final words she never wanted to hear. "You made your choice." And this time, it was my turn to walk away. Vanessa stood there, frozen, as my words settled in. "You made your choice." Her lips parted like she wanted to protest, to argue, to say something that could change the outcome. But there was nothing left to say. For the first time in her life, she wasn't in control. She had walked away from me when she thought I had nothing to offer. Now, she was watching me walk away from her, knowing I had everything she wanted and there was nothing she could do about it. The last attempt, I stepped back into my house, ready to shut the door in her face, but her hand shot out, grabbing the frame. "Wait," she whispered. "I didn't." "Please," she tried again, stepping closer, her eyes wide, desperate. "Don't do this. I know I hurt you. I know I made a mistake, but you didn't just make a mistake, Vanessa." I cut her off, my voice calm, cold. You made a decision. She inhaled sharply, her shoulders shaking. I thought she paused, swallowing. I thought I wanted something more. But the truth is, I was blind. I was chasing something that wasn't even real. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. And now that you realize that, you expect me to take you back? She flinched. I could see it. The shame, the regret, the heavy weight of realization pressing down on her. She had thrown away something real for an illusion. And now, she had nothing left. I don't expect anything, she said, her voice small. I just need to know if there's still a chance. I let the silence stretch, watching her squirm under my gaze. Then, finally, I spoke. There isn't. Her face crumpled. I had seen her in so many ways before. Confident, ambitious, driven, determined, but never like this. Never so broken. But that was the difference between us. When I had been broken, I rebuilt myself. When she was broken, she ran back to the person she thought would save her. But I wasn't that person anymore. I had been her safety net for too long. Now, she had to fall. The truth she never wanted to hear. You said you wanted someone who matched your status, I reminded her. Well, now you're standing in front of me, jobless, struggling, looking for a handout. Her breath hitched. I stepped forward just enough so she had to tilt her head up to look at me. You didn't leave me because I wasn't enough, Vanessa. My voice was steady, unwavering. You left me because you thought you could do better. Her lips trembled. You thought I was disposable. I let the words sink in. And now, you're the one standing outside my door, begging to be let in. A single tear slipped down her cheek. For the first time, she had nothing to say. Because everything I said was the truth. The moment she realized it was over, she took a slow step back. I deserve this, don't I? She whispered, almost to herself. I didn't answer. She looked around, as if finally seeing how far she had fallen. I thought leaving you was the start of something better, she murmured. I thought I was making the right choice. I didn't respond, because in the end, her choices had already spoken for her. She had abandoned me when she thought I had nothing. She had mocked my sacrifices. She had broken me. And now, she had to live with it. She wiped her face, inhaling shakily. I'll go now. I didn't stop her. I watched as she turned, her shoulders hunched, walking away from the door. And as she disappeared into the night, I knew this was it. There were no more second chances. No more words left to say. No more bridges left to cross. For 7 years, I had sacrificed everything for her. And now, for the first time, I was finally free. The night Vanessa walked away for the last time, I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No lingering bitterness. No sense of loss. Just freedom. For 7 years, I had sacrificed my time, my energy, my health, and my future for someone who had never truly valued me. For 7 years, I had put her dreams before my own. And when she finally got what she wanted, she discarded me like I was nothing. But in the end, I was the one who won. Because while she was left struggling, drowning in her mistakes, I had built something greater than I ever imagined. A life without her. In the weeks that followed, my life only got better. The hospital continued to grow. Doctors and investors lined up, eager to be part of what I was building. I expanded my network, traveled, and met people who saw my worth, not because of what I could do for them, but because of who I was. For the first time in years, I lived for myself. I ate at restaurants I once thought were out of my league. I dressed in clothes I never thought I could afford. I woke up without exhaustion, without regret. And every single morning, I reminded myself of one simple truth. I was never the problem. She was the last reminder of Vanessa. I didn't hear from Vanessa again after that night. Not directly, but word traveled. Mutual acquaintances whispered about how she was still jobless, still struggling, still trying to find a way back to the life she thought she was destined for. She had moved to a smaller apartment, downgraded her lifestyle, and slowly faded from the circles she once thrived in. And every time someone asked me if I felt bad for her, I had the same response. No, because I wasn't her safety net anymore. She had chosen this path. She had walked away. And now, she had to live with that decision. Finding something real. I never went looking for love again. Not immediately. I spent my time focusing on myself, on my happiness, my goals, my own success. But life has a funny way of bringing the right people into your life when you least expect it. It wasn't long before I met someone new. Someone who saw me before the wealth, before the success, before the empire I had built. She didn't care about my money, my business, my power. She cared about me. And when I looked at her, I knew this is what love is supposed to feel like. Not conditional, not dependent on status or achievement, but real. The final goodbye. One evening, as I sat in my office, I found myself thinking about Vanessa one last time. Not with anger, not with resentment, but with clarity. She had been a lesson. A reminder of what happens when people take love for granted. When they believe they can replace something real with something better, only to find that better never existed. I had given her my heart, and she had thrown it away. But in the end, I won. Because I had everything she ever wanted without her, and that was the best revenge of all. I leaned back in my chair, exhaled, and let the past fade. Vanessa was just a chapter one had closed, a name I no longer care to remember. And as I turned off my office light and stepped into the future, I knew that I had finally, completely moved on.